I actually reached my hand out and said, "Can we shake on this?" And there was this split second of hesitation, which I found a bit puzzling. It was only a very short moment, but I was a bit confused about that sort of hesitation. A few hours later, when he announced the election, that hesitation obviously made sense to me. But he did shake my hand and did say he'll promise to introduce it before summer recess. Obviously, a few hours later, he then called an election, and that put everything into question.
Thursday and Friday, of course, after the election announcement, saw a big rush through Parliament, which is known as the wash up. That was the government getting as much of the legislation that was going through Parliament through before the wrap up for the election campaign. Now, one thing that didn't make it over the line was the Prime Minister's plans for phasing out smoking. He says he wants to bring it back if he wins the general election. Also, just hours before he called an election, Rishi Sunak had a meeting with Figen Murray, who is the mother of the Manchester Arena attack victim Martyn, and she is now campaigning for what's become dubbed Martyn's Law. Here's what the Prime Minister said about it on Wednesday lunchtime.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in remembering the victims of the horrific Manchester Arena bombing 7 years ago today. Our thoughts are with them and their families. And I'd like to pay tribute to Figen Murray, who joins us in the gallery, for her courage and her bravery of her campaigning in her son Martyn's memory. And I look forward to meeting her later today too.
Well, Rishi Sunak's plan was to get the wheels in motion before the summer recess towards Martyn's Law. But now we're going to the polls. What happens next? Figen Murray joins me this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, good morning.
Could you explain, first of all, what you are campaigning for?
Yeah, I'm campaigning basically that venues have to, by law, keep customers safe, basically, and also staff. At the moment, there is no legislation to keep the public safe at any public venues, full stop. And before Martyn died, I made the assumption it's a given, but clearly it isn't.
This is safe from terrorism.
It is, yes.
And you walked all the way to London to meet the Prime Minister. How did you feel as a result of that meeting?
Yes, I walked 200 miles over 16 days to meet the Prime Minister on the actual 7th anniversary. And I had a meeting. I was lucky enough to meet both the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer that day. How did I feel about the meeting? Um, well, I'm a little disappointed because it's been 5 years since the campaign. There's been too many delays. And, at the end of the day, Martyn's Law was in every political party's manifesto in 2019. And, the Conservatives have been in, and it's not been done yet. And that's really disappointing because there's a definite gap in security and that needs to be closed.
Did you feel, though, that finally something was going to happen after that meeting?
So the meeting was an interesting one because the Prime Minister promised me that he will bring Martyn's Law, introduce it into Parliament before summer recess. And I actually repeated, "You promise?" And he said, "Yes, I promise." So I actually reached my hand out and said, "Can we shake on this?" And there was this split second of hesitation, which I found a bit puzzling. It was only a very short moment, but I was a bit confused about that sort of hesitation. A few hours later, when he announced the election, that hesitation obviously made sense to me. But he did shake my hand and did say he'll promise to introduce it before summer recess. Obviously, a few hours later, he then called an election, and that put everything into question. However, since then, both the Prime Minister and Sir Keir Starmer have, in two different interviews, said that if they were elected, they would prioritise Martyn's Law as a matter of urgency. And I do hope whoever gets in sticks to that promise. I'll hold them to it.
We did ask the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, about that
Mhm.
meeting and the apparently delayed promise this morning. Mrs. Murray, I'm going to be speaking to Figen Murray, left the meetings with you under the impression that the government this is last week, that the government was going to do something about the safety of venues. She wasn't told that there was going to be called an election, which was going to prevent you from doing something about the safety of venues. So she at least is owed an apology, isn't she?
Well, look, of course, I'm disappointed that Martyn's Law was going to be, as part of the criminal justice bill, was going to be in my portfolio. And there are a number of things, including Martyn's Law, that I wanted to progress. And of course, I'm sorry that we haven't been able to do that. The conversation I had with Figan and her family and the campaign, I said that the chances of us being able to get this fully through the legislative process before a general election was unlikely, but that we would absolutely, if we were returned to government, prioritise this to make sure it does get in the statute books. And I also said, and I know that they went on to speak to the leader of the opposition, I also said, because there is widespread and cross-party support with it, I think it's inconceivable that even if a general election does delay this, it is inconceivable that this will not be addressed very, very early in the next parliament, irrespective of which party came forward. Of course, I'm sorry that we weren't able to progress it immediately, but we did discuss the chance that it might be disrupted by a general election.
An apology there, but has anyone, Rishi Sunak or anyone from his office, actually got back to you to sort of explain the awkwardness of what they said to you?
No, nobody has. But you know what? People are saying, should the government or the Prime Minister apologise to me? No, he shouldn't. And I'm saying that not to get anybody off the hook, but I'm looking at the bigger picture. Had he not met me after me walking 200 miles all the way to meet him, there would have been uproar. So he had no choice but to meet me. And then, given the situation on the day, he knew he's going to call an election, but we didn't know, obviously, when we met him. So it must have been really a difficult situation he was in. So no,
He could have trusted you to keep a secret, couldn't he?
Well, no, I wouldn't have expected him to do that. I don't feel he lied to me. I feel he misled me. He could have maybe worded it slightly different, so that I would have left the meeting a little disappointed, but not misled. And that's as far as it'll go, to be honest. But as I said, this is an important piece of legislation. Any government, the top priority should be the safety of the people, that they, the citizens. What could be more important?
Yeah, I just want to ask you finally about that, because obviously with Martyn's death, you have, the most profound motivation to get involved with this. But has it surprised you really that your activity has been necessary and still hasn't been satisfied of what would seem to be a very obvious thing to, we have fire precautions, why can't we have anti-terror precautions?
Yeah, do you know, my youngest daughter was interviewed on the day we set off, and she said to a journalist, my mum shouldn't have to do this walk at the age of 63. And she was right. That walk shouldn't have been necessary. In fact, my campaign shouldn't have been necessary. This legislation is absolutely needed. There are rules for all sorts of things at venues, how many toilets there have to be, etc. Yet there is nothing for security. And the face of terrorism has changed. The new terrorism isn't like the old one where people announce that they might target somebody or somewhere. New terrorism can mean an attack can happen anytime, anywhere, any place. And that's what makes it so dangerous. We have already had over 40 near misses where an attack was only just stopped on time. And the law of averages, sooner or later, an attack isn't going to be stopped. And that shouldn't be happening.
Figan Murray, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And of course, we will see how the campaign for Martyn's Law plays out here on Times Radio.